Hello, parents. This is Mike Allan from the Catholic Diocese of Lexington, Kentucky, the Director of Family Life and Evangelization, and here with our third conversation here in response to your responses on the survey of parenting, the challenges and opportunities that we have during this pandemic and lockdown. And I'm really thrilled to have, for this conversation, a good friend, Dr. Allan Allday, who is a parishioner at Holy Spirit Parish. He and his wife, Carrie, entered into the Catholic Church several years ago. He's an associate professor in the Department of Early Childhood Education and Rehabilitation Counseling at the University of Kentucky. His professional focus is working to improve outcomes of children and youth who exhibit behaviors that interfere with their social functioning. Dr. Allday provides consultation using principles of applied behavioral analysis to schools and families to support their work with a child exhibiting challenging behaviors. He is a board-certified behavior analyst and a licensed behavior analyst in Kentucky. His research focuses on how adult behavior affects child behavior and how simple changes to adult behavior can improve a child's outcomes. He and his wife, Carrie, have 3 sons, Solomon, who is 11, Noah, who is 7 or 8, Allan?
7.
7, and little boy, Luke, and they are expecting a 4th child, a daughter, hopefully to be born this fall. So, Allan, hello.
Hey, Mike. It's good to be with you, and good to be able to have the opportunity to talk with you again on this. It's been a couple of years since we've done this. So
I had my old radio show, and you were a regular guest. It was a lot of fun. So
it was the best time you can have at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly. Hey, you even brought me donuts a couple of times. So unfortunately, the pandemic makes that impossible. But my waistline thanks you.
Yes, well, mine does too.
Yeah, absolutely. Remind me how long ago that you and your family entered the Catholic Church?
We entered in 2016, and during the Year of Mercy, as it would be.
Yeah, fantastic. So 4 years now.
Yeah, we're all hats at being a Catholic now. So
that's exactly right. And you had from a Baptist background, from beautiful Demopolis, Alabama.
Yeah.
And Carrie, Methodist background.
Yeah.
From Dothan, Alabama. So
what
all over the world, and glad you're here.
Yeah, well, one of the things we learned is never say never, because I remember us saying, well, we would never be Catholic, and here we are.
yeah. Never get those nevers before God, because He loves those.
Oh yeah, he I'm sure he laughs at quite a few things, because I think even in relation to parenting, I think of all the things we said, oh, we will never do that, and we've done them all. It's one of the greatest, doses of humble pie I think you can, eat.
I have those rare moments of insight or epiphany when I'm frustrated with one of my children. All of a sudden, it strikes me that this must be how frustrated God is at times with me.
I have no doubt, and it's a good thing He has an infinite amount of mercy, because I know as a parent I do not. I have a very limited amount of mercy.
Exactly.
And I think about with me, just as I'm so thankful that He is merciful and patient with me, and I certainly try to be. And I'm sure you can hear Luke, who has a very, very high-pitched voice, talking. You'll hear him talking quite a bit, I'm sure, behind me. Who knows what he's going to say?
That increases your parenting credibility and the authenticity of the topics today. It's the way I look at it.
And that's one of the things I think I remember before we had kids, and I was doing this, and I knew it all. I mean, I knew everything in the book. I could regurgitate the book to you, and all the principles and all the everything related to this. And then I had a child, and I was like, okay, I know absolutely nothing. I know nothing. And because it does is the rubber meeting the road. And I think that has made me a much better teacher and a much better, educator and much better behavior analyst. And just because I do realize the realities of what parents are going through. I mean, I deal with it, I deal with it every day myself.
Well, that's really the perfect synthesis of theory and practice for sure. Let's jump right in here. One of the things that I said in your introduction is that you use principles of applied behavior analysis. So
Yes.
tell us what applied behavior analysis is.
Well, I mean, I guess the dollar store definition would be it uses the science of, it is a science. Applied behavior analysis is applying the principles of behaviorism to people, basically. That would be the easiest way to say it. And so some of the basic principles of behavior are going to be things like reinforcement and understanding what is reinforcement, understanding what is punishment, understanding how do we apply certain techniques that are research-based techniques to the use of changing a child's behavior. So, or not just a child. I mean, this works with adults. This works with basically what I say is it works with everybody. If you're human, it applies to you because the principles are very broad in that regard. With applied behavior analysis, what the ultimate goal is to improve social functioning. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We help to identify a problem, a behavior that's impeding either academic or social functioning, determine why do we think this is happening. We have a whole list of things we can do to determine that, and then come up with interventions that can help to either teach a replacement behavior, or a more appropriate way to get what you want, or help to increase or decrease inappropriate behaviors and increase appropriate behaviors. And so I think the reason I like ABA or applied behavior analysis is multiple reasons. One, not just because this is what I do and teach, but I've seen it work across multiple countries. I mean, we've had the chance to live in other countries. I've seen it work. With with young, with old. It does apply across everybody, and I think to me that's one of the most powerful things. And the second thing I like about it is the fact that it is a science. It's not just it's not just about what do we think or what do we feel. It's really more about what are we doing. And I think there's a lot of social sciences that aren't necessarily based in experimental methodologies that are true scientific. So like the way we do experiments in applied behavior analysis is we have control and experimental conditions that you would be. So if you were in our study, you would experience the control. So like if we do nothing, and then you would experience the experimental condition, which would be whatever intervention we're doing. And we have ways to kind of manipulate that to where we can show that it's our experiment, it's our intervention that actually changed the behavior, not something else. So just a quick example would be, I think about me when I was a child, and I got in, so was having a little bit of trouble at school. Nothing bad. This was elementary, and I remember my teachers saying, we're going to do blank, and this is what we're going to do. But what they didn't know is at the same time, my dad also said, if you don't act right, then something's going to happen, which we won't get into. We won't get into that, but I'll just say it would not be pleasant. And so my behavior changed at school. Of course, my teachers thought it was because of what they did, but the reality is it's because of the fear of God my dad put in me at that moment. So So like an example like that is what we don't want to see. We don't want to see, oh, we think what we're doing is changing the behavior, but the reality is it's not. So we have ways to kind of to manipulate the variables to
Wow.
where we can show it's what we did actually changed the behavior. And I think that's a very powerful thing when you see it. Um, whenever you see that you can do that, it's it is it's some. So those are some of the reasons why I do this, and I've seen the benefits of it, and it works. It's
Well, one of the things that, that we said also in your introduction, that your research focuses on how adult behavior affects child behavior and how simple changes to adult behavior can improve a child's outcomes. Because typically when we think about behavior issues with children, or more personally, our own child or children, we oftentimes think about how can their behavior be different. We don't often think about how our own behavior affects them.
right, and I think that's what uh, what is the most frustrating for me as a parent is whenever my kids are doing something that I don't want them to do, whether they're being defiant to something I'm asking them to do, whether they're just being disobedient in any way, or doing a behavior I don't want them to do. What really makes me frustrated at myself is I know that in the end, I'm the one that has to change. I have to change my reaction to the behavior. I have to change my approach to it. And so I'm going to have to change if they're ever going to change. And I think that's why I've always focused on that as my research, because the hardest behavior to change in the world. I mean, changing a child's behavior is actually pretty easy, but the hardest behavior to change, in my experience, has been the person you see in the mirror every morning. I mean, that is the hardest behavior to change, because I'm always right. I mean, no matter what I do, I'm right. My intentions are always pure. My child's intentions are always not pure.
Hmm.
My reactions are always the law. Their reactions is always unlawful. I mean, so it's coming to grips with the fact that, understanding that every intervention we do, anytime we intervene on a problem behavior, in schools, in a clinic, in wherever, it requires a change in us. And I think that is a again a difficult pill to swallow, as it would be, because we have to change our responses to it, and that's hard.
Well, one of the things that really prompted this conversation, we did a parenting survey that we sent out to parents across the diocese, and they were asked to identify the challenges during this lockdown, particularly. I mean, as we said before we recorded, parenting as a vocation is challenging enough in normal circumstances, let alone in this lockdown situation and all the different changes and stressors that come. One of the responses, I think over a quarter of the parents that responded identified oppositional and defiant behavior from their child or children as one thing that they're dealing with. And so I know that you and your work, you don't just teach in a classroom. You also have done a lot of consulting work with schools, public schools, um, private schools. You've seen, you oftentimes are called in for the most challenging situations, right? With children. And so you get really the opportunity to apply the theory to practice. Um, would it surprise you? Do you think that parents deal with this oppositional defiant behavior more during a lockdown, or do you think it's just going to be par for the course of parenting in general?
I mean, I'll just say from my experiences during this lockdown, has been I am spending a lot more time at home. So I'm getting to see a lot more opportunities to respond.
Right.
I mean, my guess is a lot of parents are just seeing a lot that where they may only see their child, assuming a child in school, they see their child from 3 until 8, let's say, so 5 hours a day. And now they're seeing their child, well, not 24 hours a day because they're sleeping. So about 16 hours a day, probably. So, you're seeing at least twice, practically, you're seeing at least twice your children twice as long as you normally do, just practically. So I think it's only natural that we would probably see an increase in this because, if let's say on a weekend you have a family and they deal with, oppositional or defiant behavior 3 times on a weekend, well, now every day is the weekend. So seeing 3 times that amount is going to make it seem a lot worse, but it may still be kind of the same rate that it has been. It's just you have more time. And so that's one of the things I would encourage parents to think about. Like, is this actually worse now, or does it just seem worse now because you're engaged in in these interactions a lot more frequently, just because of the nature of we're all together. So I think that's one of the things, because I know for me, I try to think about this. I think about this with so our middle, or now who will be our middle 2 children, but the 7-year-old and the 3-year-old, they like to kind of go at it, and mostly the 7-year-old likes to parent the 3-year-old, and this has always happened. I mean, this has been happening for for at least the last, well, since the 3-year-old could walk. So 2 years.
Right.
No, Luke, don't do that. Luke, and then of course Luke screams, and then it just it's very predictable. And so I began to notice a lot that it seems like it's happening all the time. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, will they just stop? Will they just leave each other alone? But when I actually stop and think about it, and I think back to when I was going into work and I was coming home, and I was home for, I was home with them for about 4 hours a day. It's happening, if it happened, let's say 2 times an hour, it's probably still happening 2 times an hour. So it's not like the rate of it's gone up. It's still happening about the same amount. I'm just here more. And now I can appreciate why when I came home, my wife would say, I'm about to choke somebody. And so she wouldn't really do that. So don't worry anything. But that's the kind of the idea of like, okay, I see what you've been dealing with now. This is she needs a raise.
So, I mean, I just my own experience as a parent, oppositional and defiant behavior is a major frustration. You have something you want your child to do, and they just refuse to do it. And no, we oftentimes, I guess, in those situations, we bring the threat of punishment or the increasing. We increase the intensity of the threat, whether the spirit in which it's delivered or the proposed punishment and so forth, and it creates this cycle. It seems like where you dig in your heels, they dig in their heels. So, what are some practical principles that parents can use in navigating those moments?
Well, I think that probably the most one of the most useful first steps, I think, in dealing with defiant behavior is looking at what point can you predict the child's going to be defiant. And I know a lot of parents will say and teachers and everybody will say, well, it's so unpredictable. And, so I'll always ask, which is a silly question, but it gets to the point of, if I said, okay, like I'll just use you, I'll say, okay, Mike, imagine if I were coming to your house and I want to see one of your children be defiant, and I want to see it within the first 10 minutes I'm at your house. And if I see it in 10 minutes, I'll give you $10,000. And so what time do I need to come to your house? And you would say, well, it's so unpredictable to come right before dinner, because you realize that even though I don't have $10,000 to give you, even though I can't do that, just the idea of, okay, well, what if somebody wanted to come and they needed to see it? I mean, we can almost always go like, we can shrink it down. And I've seen this happen with teachers and with parents. We're like, the child's so unpredictable. It's so unpredictable. And then in the end, they can identify a very predictable pattern. Now this doesn't mean that every single time this happens, the child's defiant, but predictably, when it's this time of the day, they're going to be more defiant. So I think the first logical, simple step that most parents can take is to just take a step back, not in the moment, not in the heat of the moment, not in the time whenever everything is, they're in active defiance, but in a time of calm, take a step back and just think, okay, when am I most likely to see defiance? Like, is it when I ask them to turn off the TV? Is it whenever it's time for dinner? Is it whenever it's time for bed? Is it whenever, because, so that'd be the one question. When am I most likely to see defiance? And then also, when am I least likely? So like if I said to one of my kids, hey, we're going to eat kale. Let's sit down and eat some kale. And they're going to say, I'm okay. I'm good with that. So I can predict that with almost 100% accuracy. They're going to be like, I'm really not that hungry. But if I said, hey, let's sit down and eat ice cream, I can predict with 100% accuracy they're all going to be at the table before I can get the word cream out of my mouth. And it's the same way with problem behavior. Like you can get to the place where you can almost predict, okay, if I tell him to get off the TV to go and do something he doesn't want to do, he's going to be defiant. If I say get off the TV because I want you to do something that he wants to do, that's something he likes, then he just obeys immediately. And I think to start with, for parents, just stepping back, thinking about when can I predict? Because that is the first step. The first step is, can I predict when this is going to happen or when it's most likely to happen? And then from there, we can go. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
And I know this is not like, I think all of us, and myself included, we always want like the magic answer. This is going to solve everything immediately. Well, it doesn't. Nothing does that. I mean, it's, barring a miracle from God, I like to think of behavior change as more of, the road to Emmaus as opposed to the road to Damascus. Damascus, you get knocked off your horse, things change. I know it doesn't say he was knocked off his horse. I know, but so Paul is knocked down, immediate conversion, versus Emmaus was, this process of conversion. And I think behavior change is much more an Emmaus walk than it is, a Damascus. Although we all want Damascus.
Yeah, that's right.
Although I do. But anyway, so I'd say that would be step one. Step one, think back. Can you predict it? I think the next step would be thinking through, okay, what is it that I'm asking them to do? What are the things I'm asking them to do? And how am I asking them to do it? Like, am I, so thinking about my behavior, what am I asking them to do? And how am I asking them to do it? Is it, okay, Mike, you need to, turn off the TV. 5 minutes passes. Mike, turn off the TV. 5 minutes passes. Mike, I said, turn off the TV. 5 minutes passes. Then you get really mad and you go over, you turn it off, and then they blow up. And then it's just this, and you begin to think, so think about like, what am I doing? What are the things I've been doing to, in this process? Like, am I giving them 5 opportunities before I have had enough of it? And I'll use, hopefully my mom won't watch this, but I'll just use her as an example. When I was a kid, if my mom would call out and say, Allan, come in, it's time to eat, I knew I could keep playing. And then she'd say, come in, it's time to eat. I knew I could keep playing. Come in, it's time to eat. I knew I could keep playing. And then she'd say, I'm not going to tell you again. And, and I knew if I'm not going to tell you again, I still had at least one more time before she wasn't going to tell me again. So I kind of, even though as a child, I didn't plan it out to be evil, an evil plot against my mom. My experience with my mom told me that I had multiple prompts from her before she was really going to get mad and kind of force me to come in. I had experiences with my dad where he said, come in, and he meant come in, and he meant come in now. And not in a minute, not when you feel like it, he meant come in. And so I responded different to them based on who it is. So I think one of the things that, that if there are 2 parents at home and they're both dealing with this, and think through together, like, are the responses different based on who's giving the instruction, because that is a huge thing. That's, because I know for me, I see my kids respond different to me than to my wife. Not that I'm better or not that I impose anything, but they just respond different to me, and that's both in a positive way and in a negative way at times. There's some areas they respond better to her, some areas they respond better to me. And I think that's the kind of a second thing to think through. So step 1 would be, can I predict defiance? Can I predict no defiance? And then kind of looking at what's happening. And step 2 would be, what am I doing within that context of that defiant moment? And then, if there are 2 parents at home, what about my, the other parent? Does the other parent respond the same way? Do they respond different? Does a child respond better? And just kind of thinking through what in ABA we call the contingencies, which are like the if-thens, the contingencies of what's happening. So what's happening before the defiance, which we would call an antecedent. So what happens before the defiance? Then we have the defiance. And then the third part would be thinking about, like, what happens after it? Like, what is my response? Do I just go and say, Mike, you know better, and do I fuss at you? Do I actually just don't follow through? So go take out the trash, fine, then I'll just take it out. I mean, what happens after it? Is it a lot of screaming? Is it a lot, and then what are my responses in the aftermath, which would be kind of in applied behavior analysis, we call that in the consequence, what happens after.
Right.
But so I think what I've found over the years of doing this is, even if families can just do that part, if they can just start with just, taking a step back, even in the moment. I mean, even in the moment as this is playing out, if you can just kind of pay attention to what are you doing? I mean, sometimes awareness of what's happening is the best intervention, because you're like, wait a minute, because I know kids. I mean, I've worked with lots of kids who, get fussed at, lectured to, and the adults are just so outdone. You will listen to what I say, da, da, da. And you see that the child is doing this, and they're getting a tremendous amount of attention from it. I mean, very emotional attention. I mean, like and I'm so into it as an adult, in kind of letting you have it, and then you stop and you think about, how many times do we give them that level of emotional attention when they're doing something the
Mm.
right way. I mean, very rarely do we, it's kind of the approach of let's let a sleeping dog lie. I mean, let's don't let's don't go over there and poke the bear while the bear's asleep because he's happy. Let's just let him be happy. But from a child's perspective, for instance, if they are doing this behavior to get access to attention, which most people say, well, that's ridiculous. Why would he be defiant to get attention? Well, because it works.
Mm.
If the only time you know you're going to get attention is by being defiant, because in a normal conversation, we say 3 words to each other. But when I'm defiant, you just talk to me and talk to me and talk to me, and you give me a lecture, and we go through the lecture, and I can say this word to you, and it's going to prolong the lecture. And then in the end, when I've had enough of the attention as the child, I can just say, okay, I'll just go ahead and do whatever. I mean, so that does happen. You can think of it like I always, try to explain it to people like it's an attention gas tank. When my gas tank is empty, I engage in a behavior that gets me access to attention, and it starts filling up. And when it gets full, then I quit engaging in the behavior, and I'm kind of good for a while. And then I go, and then my gas tank gets empty, and it's sometimes it is just that predictable. Like we were in a school before the school shut down, and we were watching a child, and and it was very predictable that every 45 seconds, this child engaged in a behavior to get access to attention. I mean, it was just like clockwork. And I was like, this child didn't even know, probably doesn't really cognitively know that that's what he's doing, but it was predictable. Every 45 seconds he would do something. The teacher would say, not to do that. And that would be kind of fill his tank. Very low gas mileage for that kid.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said he may not be aware that he's doing it, at least cognitively. Is there I guess there's probably even behavior patterns that are predictable, even in the engagement between the adult and the child. We have this familiar, when we have these confrontations and so forth, there's almost a familiarity. We may not even recognize it, but if somebody from the outside observed it, here, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and so forth. It's predictable.
Oh, it's extremely predictable, and it is comfortable. I think that's the thing that most people don't realize. And again, when I say most people, I'm including myself in most people, because I should know better, but I don't, because I mean, I have a problem, and it's called being a human, and so I engage. I give into my human nature quite a bit, and I have to almost literally. Sometimes I actually do take off my dad hat and put on my Dr. Allday hat, because Dr. Allday doesn't respond emotionally, and Dr. Allday doesn't do this, but Dad does. Dad gets angry. Dad gets frustrated. Dad overreacts. Dad does all these things, and I have to stop and say, you know better than this. You train people to do this, and so and it is because it's just so ingrained in us to have these responses. And so I would say that for many of the parents who are dealing with this, you can probably take me through a Defiant episode of, first he's going to do this, or she, either one. First he's going to do this, and I'm going to say this. Then he's going to do this, and I'm going to say that. And if he says that, I'm going to say this. And it is this, this is kind of like a dance. We dance with each other, and then the dance ends. And how does the dance end? That's going to be different based on every parent and every situation. I mean, some dances end with the with the parents overreacting and maybe saying something or doing something they regret, and then they end up saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and then the child gets a lot of loving attention because the parents have said or done something they regret doing. Or the dance ends with the parent just being like, whatever, and they walk away, and the child still didn't follow through with what they asked them to do, which is another potential outcome, which would be if they're doing it for escape purposes, to get out of doing something, then they know that I just have to put up with the song and dance until mom gets frustrated, she walks away, and then I still don't have to do what she asked me to do. So, I mean, it is this, it is this process that we go through, and it becomes very easy for us to get in this rut of just having the same response to the behavior. And I think this is why it's so hard as an individual to keep yourself in check, just to keep yourself in check and say, okay. And I would just let me just use another example of that's something that's not really emotionally stimulating, but I think those examples help to do other things. So I had to replace some drywall at our house, and I can say whatever is paid for people to hang drywall it's so worth. And so I was trying to do this, and this is not something I do frequently, and so I'm having to really think hard about it. And the big boys wanted to help me, and I found myself being real short and snappy with them, because I was like, just do this, and I was like, okay, because it's a difficult task for me, and I'm having to put a lot of effort into just what all I'm supposed to do and making sure I'm doing this right and that right. And, and there was some other things going on as well, but so I was having to really think about that. And I was realizing how short and snappy I was at them when all they wanted to do is learn how to do this. And so I did have to in the middle of it, I just had to, again, kind of take off, put on this hat, say, okay, I have to teach them. Because I had an agenda. My agenda was to get it done as quickly as possible, as correctly as possible, without anything. And so again, even though this is not a defiance issue, it's still the same principle. The principles are the same, to where it's my fault that I had an agenda I was trying to get. And when all my kids wanted to do is learn how to do something. So I stopped. And it took me, instead of probably 3 hours to do it, it took about 8 hours to do it. But in the end, it was done, and the kids learned how to do. They learned something, and that's all they really wanted. They just wanted to do something with me. But I realized, even in simple things like that, and especially when we get into defiance and we get into things that are more emotionally, we get emotionally attached to, which is, I know, not a ABA thing, but it is, I think I can explain it behaviorally, but I think people understand that kind of that language of being emotionally invested in that. Let
me ask a question here, Allan, because,
yeah.
you're talking about awareness and observing these things and noticing these patterns and so forth. I guess there's a fine balance between, parenting evokes a lot of guilt sometimes, and so we think, oh man, well, so my kid's behavior is my problem. It's my failure as a parent and so forth. The other side of the line, though, is that, providing hope, right? That there are actually things you can do, because I think a lot of parents dealing with defiance and oppositional behavior, whether it's intense or just, more mainstream, I guess you could say, there's often a feeling of hopelessness that things can never be different than they are. And so the hope there is, besides just being aware of ourselves and what the problems are that maybe I'm even contributing to, but what are the steps we can take toward change? Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. And, and I think that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I realize I've probably not sounded very, very hopeful. But the reason I guess I start with what I started with changing ourselves, is because, sometimes a lot of times it does, our perspective needs to change
Mm-hmm.
first. I mean, we have to be able to step back and recognize that we're not always right.
Right.
We're not always, one of the hardest things to do is ask your children for forgiveness,
Yeah, oh yeah.
and to say, please forgive me because I overreacted, or please forgive me because that was rude. Please forgive me. And that in and of itself is such a great teacher, having the humility is something we want everybody else to have, but we don't necessarily want to have it ourselves.
That's right.
We want our kids to be humble and obedient, but we don't necessarily want to be humble and obedient. And I think the reason I start with that is hopefully not to discourage anybody, but to encourage you that change can happen. I mean, I've seen it. I mean, we don't have time to go through. I've seen what should have been impossible situations, impossible behaviors change. I mean, I've been in an orphanage in the middle of Ukraine in a terrible situation. And we changed the behavior of a 29-year-old who couldn't talk, who couldn't walk, who couldn't do. I mean, you can change behavior. That is the hopeful story. It can change. What I tell people always is, as long as you have breath in your lungs, there is hope.
That's right.
I mean, for whatever. And, and I think that is something that yes, there is always hope. And yes, as Christians, we were told, pick up your cross and follow me. And a cross is not the ornamental cute thing that people, that you hang, that's got a sweet saying on it. I mean, it's hard. And
That's right.
I think for parents, and especially, for Christian parents and for Catholic parents specifically, today is Our Lady of Fatima. I mean, there you go. What better parent do we have as a model than Mary? I mean, she saw some really hard things, and so that is something that that we can always ask her for her intercession. But I think for parents, what to do. This is the kind of the $1 million question.
And let me just hit the pause button real quick, because yeah, what you expressed there, I think, is a real key. The difference between guilt that can be paralyzing and conviction, which is the really the Christian idea that we recognize, we do that examination of conscience, but it prompts us with the help of God's grace toward those changes. And so that's kind of the fine line. We don't give in to guilt for its own sake, but understand that we are called to continue growing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things of finding the balance, which is very difficult, of feeling sorry for your kid because you overreacted versus, having compassion. Those are two very different. Like, feeling sorry for somebody makes you not really want to do anything. Well, I just bless his heart, kind of the whole bless your heart mentality. If you're not from the South, maybe people don't, if they're never heard the bless the heart, but Kentucky's a bless your heart state, so they get it. But, it's kind of like, oh, well, bless his heart. Well, that doesn't really help anybody. So it is a call to action. And I'd say, for Catholic parents, if one of the things would be, have you confessed this? Have you been to confession and said, I overreact to my child, and I know this is not good? And, to me, that I have done that as a parent, and again, I'm a person who, this is my professional career, and yet I'm still a human. And I think you have to give yourself the grace of understanding that you're human and you're not going to do it perfectly every time. And at the same time, say, I can do it better. You can always do it better. And that's something that is a very important part. So as you go through and you think through, can I predict it? Can I predict when it's going to happen? Can I predict when it's not going to happen? And then you think through the circumstances surrounding both of those events. Like I said, I'll use an example of, because this has been one we dealt with a lot with parents, is getting, kids giving up like getting off something with technology. That seems to be a big promoter of defiance. No, I'm not going to go, and that's, and so as you begin to think through the circumstances about what leads to defiance and the circumstances of what doesn't, and again, thinking of what's usually happening before and then what happens after. Like, what do I give a lecture? Do I just let them get away with not giving it up? Do I just finally cave and say whatever you want to do? What happens afterwards? And once you've kind of identified that, it just, even doing that will probably prompt a behavior change in you. Like, for instance, one of the best for kids who are oppositional and defiant, a lot of times they get a lot of reinforcement, meaning like it maintains your attention, and that helps to maintain that behavior. Meaning that the more you lecture them and you argue with them, the more they're going to argue, because that is kind of the process. And so one of the best strategies that you can come up with for that is, before you're in the moment, think of what you want to say. Before you go into it, think of what you want to say. And so I think of these things like, what do you really want to threaten? Because, I've heard things threatened that nobody's going to follow through with, and I've heard things promised that nobody's going to follow through with. You know what, Mike, if you just will turn that off, I'll take you to Disney World. Well, you're not going to take the child to Disney World, and you're not, but you're desperate, and you start throwing out things, or you think things like, you're never going to eat again. Well, you're going to feed them again, so you don't threaten something you're not going to follow through with. But whenever you do this and you begin to think through, and have something. So like for me, I have my standard saying, and this is something I came up with when Solomon, our 11-year-old, was little. It always goes with, something to the effect of like this. Solomon, you can put on your shoes, or I can help you put on your shoes. Which one? And I've stopped. And that's because, the goal is his shoes are going to go on, and he can do it, or I can help him do it. And I give him a chance to choose, because, this is one of the things with defiance, they're like, oh, well, they need a opportunity to choose. So I give him a choice. You can put them on, or I can put them on. Which one? And then I wait. I give him about 5 seconds to let him make a decision. Okay, I'll help you put on your shoes. And then I don't have to do it in an angry way. I don't fuss. I don't say, well, if you would have obeyed me, then you would, it's nothing like that. It's just like, okay, that's your choice. I'll help you. And my bet would be, I can say for our middle child, for Noah, you could see his wheels turning. You could even hear him turning, because he'd be like, let me see what's going to happen if I don't put my shoes on. And so I just start putting them on, and he hated me putting his shoes on, but I never fussed. I didn't yell at him. It was a guarantee. But it's your choice. And so thinking of things like that, thinking of things where you can say, if you get off if you turn off the TV, you can watch it again later. But if you don't turn off the TV, you can't watch it later. That's it. And then give them time to think, because they have to process, do it. Now, is Mama and Daddy really going to follow through, or are they not? And the likelihood is, if you have a history of not following through, they're going to test you, and they're just going to say, no, I'm not going to turn it off. So you may have to, then you can bring it back. Well, would you like to turn it off, or would you like me to turn it off? Which one? Okay. So then you turn it off, but then you have to remember that and not allow them access to the TV that night. Right. I'm sorry, earlier you chose that. And and don't expect them to be like, thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Thanks for making me a responsible human being. Because they're not going to say that. They're going to be like, I hate you. It's all your fault. You make everything terrible. But when you get that response, when you follow through, in a non-emotional way. You have to just be able to say, I'm sorry, that's what you chose. And then be able to turn and walk away. And believe me, you can you could hear a pin drop sometimes whenever you just turn and walk away and you don't engage in the argument. And you just go back to, I'm sorry, that's what you chose. That's it. I mean, that is, and they can keep arguing with you. But you said, I'm sorry. I hate you. You're the worst parent ever. You know, tomorrow's a new day. Maybe you can earn some TV time tomorrow. And I think that's the thing where we feel like it's just human nature where we feel like we have to have the last word.
Sure.
If we don't get the last word in, we have failed as a parent. I've got to give my stamp of approval to the last word. And there, take that, you know, and that's
Mic drop.
yeah. You know, and if you're dealing with a kid who really is good and defiant, they know every button to push on you, and they can play you like a, you know, like a drum. I mean, it's like, watch this. If I say this to dad, watch him get mad. Boom, whoa, and my arm goes up every time. Boom, whoa, you know, and it's an amazing thing to watch how this plays out. And so what we have to do is understand that, you know, our kids know how to play us. I can just tell you right now, when I was a kid, if I needed money, I would bypass my father to go ask my mother, because my mother would give me $1. My dad would say, go cut somebody's grass. I mean, I knew that. I even knew that as a kid. Like, I need $1 for something. I'm going to go ask mama, because I knew mama would give it to me. Your kids do you the same way. They
Right.
know what your buttons are. They know how to push your buttons, and it doesn't make them bad. It makes them a person. Because I mean, you know, as a spousal relationship, we know what the buttons are for our spouses, and we can push the buttons on our spouses when we need an emotional response. We can get an emotional response if we want to, and that is, again, doesn't mean that your child is a bad child. It just means they're a human being, and that's what we do. I mean, we know how to do that, and that's, you know, so the idea behind this would be, you know, just as a broad suggestions, and would be, you know, come up with what words you need to say, stick with them, say those words, and when they try to pull you into an argument, you just have to go back to those words and like, I mean, I'm not going to argue with you. And I've seen that even with my mother and sister as adults, you know, as in their 60s and 40s. I've seen the same thing happen where my mom finally gave up trying to lecture my sister on something. And, you know, and my sister, even in her 40s, still kind of poked and prodded to try to get a response. When it didn't happen, you know, and my mom was like, that's amazing. I can't believe that actually works. I'm like, yeah, I can't either, but it does work. So you just we have to be willing to change the narrative.
Sure.
And that's a hard thing, because getting the last word, if we don't do that, then we think the child has won. And the reality is, every time they get an emotional reaction from us, they've won. You know.
Absolutely.
So, and of course, there's a lot more detail that can be given to individual parents' situations, and there's a lot of interventions that can be done for defiant behavior. There's so much more. You know, and I think for parents to understand that this is the way I'm talking about this. Basically, I have to talk about it in a very broad way.
Sure.
I can't be super specific, because, you know, it's just, I mean, ethically, you can't give very specific details to every parent without being in more of a consultative relationship with them. But nonetheless, these are broad ideas that do work, and that anybody can do.
So if somebody wanted to learn more about behavior analysis and these principles, and particularly on, you know, on a more of a layman's level, let's say, are there some written resources or any online resources that you would recommend?
Um, you know, online resources. I'll do some looking around. There's some. There are. You know, one of the things that we have. We have a clinic at UK, a severe behavior clinic, and of course, right now everything is on telehealth because we can't go in the homes and they can't come in. But it is ABA, and the whole point is working with families, and it's a parent training clinic basically.
Okay,
Is what it is, and it's free. There's no charges, so that's that's a good thing. And I actually just got an email that there are some openings right now for the summer. So and we've dealt with things with like with Oppositional Defiance. We deal a lot with kids with autism. We deal a lot with kids with other we've had aggression and all kinds of behaviors. So that's certainly one area that people could look into. And it's and I'll send you, maybe I can just send you the information and you can post it for people if they have an interest to call.
Absolutely.
With the understanding that our whole goal is training, empowering parents. That's the thing, to where getting psychotherapy, like talk therapy with a psychologist and others. I mean, all that stuff is great. I'm not going to say don't do it, but our number one goal, is to empower parents to be able to do it themselves, because it does no good if I come to your house and I can get your child to behave perfectly because I don't live with you. We need you to be able to do that. And that's ultimately kind of the goal of what we're trying to accomplish there. And so, but there are some other online resources that some I'm thinking about are going to be a little more heavily laden towards autism, but let me do some looking around, and I'll see for some that are more non-autism specific, and I'll send you some that are autism specific as well, in case there's parents who have children with autism that could use some help too.
Yeah, we did get one question from a mom who says she has a 3-year-old son who's autistic with a sensory processing disorder. He's normally a good kid, but will throw violent tantrums when he's set on doing something and doesn't get his way. Are there things like, with autism or with sensory processing disorder that, present, I guess, a particular challenge, but some of these principles still apply?
I mean, I would still suggest to that mom, because one of the things that we do is, again, thinking of times whenever he does and does not have the tantrums, because there's times that he doesn't. And there's times that he does. So thinking about the context around both of those would be one thing. And then, a big thing for that we work on a lot with children, and whether they have autism or whether they don't have autism, this is still something you can still work on, is giving them, like, for instance, if we know they're trying to get out of doing something, they don't want to do, you tell them to stop doing something and they do a behavior because they know they can get 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes or 30 more minutes. We work on something where we actually teach them to use their word, to give them a word, or a more appropriate alternative behavior, and then if they use that, we actually give them more time. So we actually give in to what they're trying to do, because the idea would be, if you're having a tantrum, in order to get 10 more minutes of doing this activity, if you can use your words, we'll give you 10 more minutes of doing this activity. So it's actually trying to shift to teach them to actually use their words. And then there's a process of doing that to where it starts with like that, then it moves into more of teaching them to tolerate denial, to tolerate the word, or to tolerate delay, and then to tolerate denial, because that's a hard thing for a lot of kids to tolerate. But the only other thing, just real quick, that I wanted to say, for both parents, no matter what the diagnostic label of their child may be, I mean, that's whatever label they may have. One of the things that to always keep in mind that, like a 3-year-old. So we have a 3-year-old who is not diagnosed with autism, and whoever made up terrible twos clearly didn't live to where their child was 3, because 3 is so much harder than 2. And so what I would encourage all parents to do, even if you have a label on your, a label for your child, is always keep in mind that if they're 3, there's certain behaviors that are very common for 3-year-olds. To have tantrums is a very common thing. Now, to have a violent tantrum, so what we have to do is always balance out, like, what is developmentally typical and what is developmentally atypical. So just kind of always keeping that in mind, because as this mom said, a violent tantrum is not a typical 3-year-old response, but just a normal tantrum of like crying and maybe laying in the ground. I'm like, no, is more typical. And so I think that's one of the things that I've noticed a lot, especially with parents, like, well, this is because of autism. I'm like, well, that's because he's a teenager. Like, the defiance is a pretty, not that it makes it right, but defiance is a very common behavior for teenagers to engage in. So we have to balance between what would be a typical response for a teenager versus an atypical response for a teenager. And that's something that I always try to keep in mind, the developmental ability of the child, and where they are developmentally at that moment, to see, is it typical or is it atypical? And that's a really important part. Because I think for some parents, it does give them hope that, okay, well, this is pretty typical. You talk to other parents, like, yeah, I'm dealing with the same thing. Like, good, I'm not the only one. But anyway, but I will send you I'll send you some resources, and I'll try to get them out to you by the end of the week for sure. And you can post them of, some more parent friendly things, and I would just encourage families, and especially Christian and Catholic families. I mean, and specifically Catholic. I mean, and of course today being Our Lady of Fatima. I mean, it's, there's a lot of there's always options for hope. I mean, we have stories upon stories upon stories. I mean, even like St. Augustine, I mean, he didn't start off the best, but we're still talking about him, almost 2,000 years later, by what a great person he was. And what did he have? He had a mother that prayed a whole bunch for him.
That's right.
And so I think that's certainly something that, as a scientist, I'm always collecting data, and I'm always doing stuff. And I can tell you that there are things that we still don't understand. And I've seen answers to prayer that I can't scientifically explain. I can't explain it, but it's happened because I've experienced it, and I have, kind of my own personal data points to support that. And I just think that, as Christian parents, prayer for your children is something, and even praying where they can hear you pray for them, even if it's just short prayer. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing. Even if they say that's stupid, I don't believe in that. No, it's fine. Whether you believe in it or not, that doesn't matter. I mean, there's, I was hell-bent determined I wasn't going to be Catholic, and here I am. So you just never know. So there's always hope.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time, Alan, Dr. Allday. This has been a great conversation, and hopefully parents are encouraged by it. Certainly, I pray God's blessings upon all those who are watching this interview, and pray your blessing on you and Carrie and your three boys and this little girl that will meet this fall. And I want to take a cue from you in terms of Our Lady here on the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima, and we'll pray a Hail Mary together for all parents and all families. In the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Hail
Hail
Mary,
Mary,
full of grace.
grace,
The
the
Lord is
Lord is with thee.
blessed
Blessed
art
art
thou among
thou
women,
among women,
and
and
blessed is
blessed
the
is the fruit
fruit
of
of thy
thy
womb,
womb,
Jesus.
Jesus.
Holy
Holy
Mary, Mother of
Mother of
God,
God,
pray
pray
for
for
us
us sinners,
now at
now
the
at the
hour of
hour of
our
our
death.
death.
Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the
Amen.
Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Mike.